Hello, I'm Rachel Greenberg, and I'm very happy to be presenting on behalf of the Pediatric Trials Network, or PTN. As one of the network leaders of the Clinical Coordinating Center at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, I'm excited to tell you about the network's impact thus far and our next steps going forward. The PTN is an infrastructure for investigators to conduct trials that improve pediatric labeling and child health. The network is sponsored by NICHD as a result of the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, or BPCA, legislation. Because so many drugs and devices in children are used off-label, PTN's main goal is to perform studies in off-patent therapeutics that improve dosing, safety information, and labeling. This infographic summarizes some metrics that illustrate the public health impact of PTN. PTN was originally established in 2010 and then renewed in 2018 and 2025. Over that period of time, over 12,500 participants have been enrolled across 45 states and over 300 sites. The network studies not just one particular therapeutic area, but is focused on many different therapeutic areas, from cardiology to infectious diseases, intensive care to psychiatry to maternal and infant health. We've also focused on special populations such as children with obesity, neonates, and children with Down syndrome. There have been over 50 studies, and some of them are still ongoing. And these studies have importantly been done under the rigor of FDA oversight, with data submitted to FDA for at least 33 products. As a result, those data have led to 26 label changes where we've actually changed the guidance in the FDA label for children. To give you a sense of the breadth of what PTN's accomplished, here's a list of the molecules that we've studied. So looking at this list, whether you're an outpatient or inpatient clinician and you're just prescribing a drug, or if you're a parent with a child who's received a medication, it's quite likely that PTN has in some way impacted or studied that medication. And the impact, as I mentioned, the reach of PTN is not just in one particular area, but is spread across the country, and you can see that many states have been involved in enrolling participants. Not shown in this graphic are Alaska and Hawaii, both of which have enrolled participants in PTN trials. And there are about 5 states who haven't enrolled participants as of yet, and we're setting up partnerships and training programs in those geographic areas to increase interest and knowledge in clinical research. One reason why PTN exists is that there's a gap in knowledge of pediatric medications, how they should be prescribed, their safety, and their effectiveness. The reason this gap exists is that pediatric clinical trials are difficult to do for many reasons. I'm listing a few of the challenges here and PTN's response to them. One challenge of pediatric clinical trials, and really any clinical trial, is the difficulty in contracting and startup and delays in that process. Often, pediatric clinical trials need to have many sites to enroll the number of participants needed, so the challenges of startup are magnified. In order to minimize these logistical challenges, we've created master protocols, and we've created opportunistic studies, such that the time for us to get sites started on these studies is lower. We can study multiple drugs under a single protocol and a single contract. And we've been able to do this very broadly in flexible protocols, as well as in more specific populations, such as the maternal infant lactation study we're conducting called CUDDLE. CUDDLE study has led to 2 label changes already that have added breast milk information. As we know, another challenge in pediatrics is that children, and in particular infants, have very limited blood volume. While it's not a big deal for an adult who's receiving a medication to then have 6 or 8 tubes of blood drawn to measure concentrations of that medication, that kind of intervention in a 500-gram infant would require most of their blood volume. So as part of the network, we've worked with regulatory compliant laboratories to develop sensitive assays that require just a few drops of blood to determine blood concentration. We've also made these methods available to other researchers so that anyone who wants to study those molecules that I listed on that previous slide in children can do so. A huge challenge for pediatric trials is the limited number of available participants. Compared to, say, the number of adults with cardiovascular disease, we're studying diseases in populations like infants, diseases like necrotizing enterocolitis. While it's a huge problem for those infants and families, it's a relatively small number of infants who are affected. So we've negotiated trial design with FDA, often at pre-IND meetings, to make sure we're doing just the right trial with a design that makes the most sense that will actually lead to the label change. We use standard of care trials and trials with adaptive designs so that we can minimize the number of participants. And we've also worked very hard to incorporate real-world data and evidence to minimize the number of participants who are actually needed to be enrolled. This is one quick example of our real-world evidence in action. We did this study where we looked at the PK of ampicillin by enrolling 64 infants in an open-label, multi-center, opportunistic PK study. And we also looked at safety during that study, but it was only in 64 infants. So it can be very challenging to pick up a safety signal in that size of population. But we also leveraged a partnership with the Pediatrics Medical Group and looked within their clinical data warehouse that contains real-world data to analyze the data from over 100,000 infants who received ampicillin. We found, as a result, that higher exposure of ampicillin was associated with seizures, which is not something that we could pick up in the original study of 64 infants. We just didn't have the numbers. That analysis and those data were submitted to FDA, which led to a label change. Wrapping up our response to challenges of pediatric clinical trials, another place that PTN has made an impact is with our interaction with families and participants. We know that in pediatrics, there are comparatively low consent rates to participate in studies, even studies that are low risk. As a result, we've designed studies with families in mind, with simplified trial designs, minimizing participant burden, where the procedures that are part of the studies, as much as possible, are actually part of the standard of care that the child would otherwise be receiving. We also work hard to engage participants and families in the planning of our studies and the review of study documents. For those that participate, we thank them for participation and share the results of the studies. We've also partnered with the International Children's Advisory Network, or ICANN, for this results reporting. Our PTN communication team works to create one-page, easily digestible results at a glance summaries that explain what we found in our studies. And these wonderful young people from ICANN have worked with us to create videos so that people can listen and hear in common language what the results of the studies were. And those are available on our website. Beyond the actual studies, another focus of PTN is to train the next generation of researchers. We've supported over 300 trainees across this training spectrum, from undergraduate to medical and PhD students, postgraduate students, and early career faculty. At this point, we're also embedding trainees into the leadership and administration of the network. Trainees and early career investigators can lead studies by several pathways. They're incorporated as study authors and often as lead authors. And the idea for the study can originate with them, or they can participate in protocol development, or both. PTN steering committee members each have a role in training as well by mentoring and providing projects for training purposes. Our next steps in PTN are to continue to strengthen the collaborations we have in terms of both institutional partners and program partners. Our hope is to be able to leverage these collaborations so that we can extend the reach of PTN's successful methods. Given our experience in pediatric, neonatal, and maternal infant trials, we can work with these other partners and share and leverage our experience to be able to implement larger studies. We want other groups and collaborators to be able to use PTN as a consultative resource to elevate pediatric therapeutic trials that are done within and outside the BPCA program. That's our vision. Thank you very much for your attention.